In today's equity index futures markets, let's focus on the S&P 500 future as we close out the month and the quarter. S&P 500 futures down on the day and actually closing at a little bit of a discount here, right around the 2560 level. We did see the S&P futures actually in a fairly tight range relative to how much the market's been moving recently, and we did see some back and forth motion between above and below positive territory today. But unfortunately, this afternoon, the S&P futures were unable to hold on to those gains and settled back down towards the lower end of the range for the day. And looking at the price action, as I mentioned, we did see a range here of 25.58 half on the low end and a high of 26.35.75 on the top end, and that was intraday. So about a 3% range, which still is substantial, but not nearly as substantial as the markets have been realizing recently. Looking at the drivers today, I think initially we saw a pretty positive report, I guess, as far as expectations are concerned. When you look at some of the data that came out this morning from the U.S., we had PMI, Chicago PMI number, and consumer confidence, and they were down, but they were not down as much as what the market had anticipated. And I think that gave the market a little bit of a boost here this morning initially. But then throughout the day, we also had some end of the quarter rotation taking place. End of the quarter, I think, selling and possibly rotating in and out of certain sectors. And I think that was primarily the factor that pushed us lower this afternoon as we saw those rotations taking place throughout the day. The trends, I think, when you look at the current trends in place, S&P 500, it's the worst performance for the S&P 500 since Q4 of 2008. So again, a substantial down move here for the 3 months of 2020. And when you look at it relative to some of the other areas, the Dow is actually down more than any other quarter going back to 1987. And the NASDAQ was down more than any other quarter going back to December of 2018. So again, some downside pressure here across all the different futures markets. And when you look at the price action today, the S&P future was down the most outside of the Dow. The Dow was down further. S&P down, I think, about 1.7% today on those S&P futures. However, you look at the NASDAQ and the Russell futures, they were not down nearly as much. But nonetheless, tough quarter for all the futures markets. S&P futures settling right around the 2560 level as of today's price action.